This morning, I was getting ready to start on what would be today's video, but just before I had a thought, I was like, why don't I jump on Twitter just to make sure there's no major gaming news or something else to make a video on, only to see Bethesda is trending and, well, lo and behold, as I'm sure many of you have heard or found out from the title of this one, Microsoft has purchased Bethesda, or really Zenimax, for $7.5 billion, and this actually has some pretty massive impacts for Bethesda games, including the likes of Starfield, The Elder Scrolls 6, and even what's going to happen with the Fallout franchise. There's a lot to unpack and discuss around this, so I'm going to break this video up into a couple of segments. Firstly, what we actually know, what we've heard officially and is now concretely confirmed, but then separately, more speculative. Some things that maybe aren't totally confirmed, or we have some loose statements not confirming things one way or another. Fallout New Vegas 2 actually seems like a real possibility, and that's not just speculation. We have some tweets indicating that, hey, this might be a thing, or even things like console exclusivity and when exactly we're getting releases like Starfield. If you guys enjoy the content, you can leave a like or subscribe. I definitely will be covering this in its entirety, especially going forward. I wouldn't be shocked if we hear several additional things over the coming days, and of course a like helps this video with the YouTube algorithm. So firstly, an important point of clarification that people always seem to confuse. Microsoft didn't buy Bethesda, they bought Zenimax, and Zenimax owns a variety of things. So not only did Zenimax acquire the likes of Starfield, Fallout, The Elder Scrolls, but also games like Doom, Ghostwire Tokyo, and even Deathloop. So ironically, we're actually going to see a Microsoft-owned studio have timed exclusives on the PlayStation 5 with Ghostwire Tokyo and Deathloop, but those agreements probably happened before this Microsoft deal, so they're staying in place. We also somewhat knew about this deal ahead of time. There were some leaked documents from Zenimax in 2017 where they were looking for some kind of buyout or an IPO. I actually made a speculation video that something was going on. Zenimax and their board of directors were positioning themselves for some kind of exit strategy, and it certainly looks like this buyout was that exit strategy. And you even have this tweet from a month ago where the board of directors were getting some changes or removed from the Zenimax website. But it still is pretty insane that a deal this size, one of the biggest deals in gaming just period, didn't leak at all. So firstly, let's go over some of the concrete facts, things we know wholeheartedly as a result of this deal. As I mentioned previously, Microsoft bought Zenimax and all of its subsidiaries for $7.5 billion. So it owns all of these studios and the rights to their IP. So they not only own Bethesda game studios, but also the rights to Fallout. As such, they could do things with Fallout, which we'll touch more on a bit later. This is technically the biggest gaming acquisition for Microsoft. They made other bigger acquisitions like with Skype and LinkedIn, but as far as game companies, this is the biggest, and that is important. When they bought Mojang, which was huge at the time, that was only for $2.5 billion. This is considerably larger than that. Technically, the deal right now is not finalized, and Microsoft expects it to be finalized in the second half of 2021. So although it'll probably go through, there still is some approval from regulatory committees that has to happen. And something else we heard from this, that includes Microsoft's intent to bring Bethesda's future games into Xbox Game Pass the same day they launch on Xbox or PC. And as an example, they give Starfield. So seemingly things like Starfield, The Elder Scrolls 6, will be available via Game Pass from day one, which is huge. Seemingly any of the games released by any of these studios are very likely going to be available on Game Pass from day one. So let's say hypothetically the next Doom game, you can just get it on Game Pass along with everything else, which is an insane deal. And actually kind of funny considering just this past week we heard how you get Fallout 4 with the purchase of a PS5. Although that too is pretty interesting, as we're likely to see even the back catalog get added to Game Pass at some point. So things like Fallout 4 and Skyrim SE may come to Game Pass in the coming weeks, which would be a pretty big addition, or some of the other Bethesda games you may have just missed out on, like Wolfenstein or Rage 2. Outside of that, as far as new details, we got letters from Pete, Todd, Phil Spencer, and Matt Freuer. Pete Hines being the VP of Marketing and PR, Todd Howard being the studio director of BGS, Phil Spencer the head of Xbox, and Matt Fryer the head of ZeniMax Online Studios. And from this, we actually get quite a few interesting notes and really more anecdotal evidence of what we could expect from this acquisition. From Todd Howard's letter, he describes how they've had the longest and closest partnership with Microsoft, that being Bethesda Game Studios specifically. He goes on to talk about how he thinks that we should allow everyone to have a good gaming experience, and expanding on that with, and a belief we should bring that to everyone, regardless of who you are, where you live, or what you play on, regardless of the screen size, the controller, or your ability to even use one, which we'll come back to in a bit. He describes how new tech in the Series S/X had led to the largest engine overhaul since Oblivion for Starfield and The Elder Scrolls 6. So not directly related to this acquisition, acquisition, but that's actually pretty big news. The engine being used for the next generation of games, Starfield and TES 6, should have significant upgrades. There's been a lot of controversy about reusing the engine, but it'll feature bigger upgrades from even that of Skyrim to Fallout 4. A very interesting note from Phil Spencer. One of the things that has me most excited is seeing the roadmap with Bethesda's future games. Some announced and many unannounced. So we should definitely look out for future Bethesda announcements at some of these up and coming Xbox events over the next 6 months to a year. He also describes how he looks forward to empowering Bethesda with the resources and support of Microsoft so they could scale their creative visions to more players in new ways. With Pete Hines, he gets pretty blunt with it, so why the change? Because it allows us to make even better games going forward. Microsoft is an incredible partner and offers access to resources that will make us a better publisher and developer. He also has this great line about answering questions such as, when the hell will you tell me about Starfield? And in general, how this should lead to bigger and better games. And then finally with Matt Fryer, he mentions how the Elder Scrolls Online will large in part be staying the same, but he does have an interesting note about how they want to keep growing on each of the platforms that are currently supported, which I found to be an odd line. So overall from these, it seems like that Bethesda games are definitely getting empowered, whatever that means, from this acquisition. It certainly seems like there should be more money around, so perhaps certain games will actually get upgrades or additional support, which we'll touch on a bit later. But firstly, the big question around this, the more speculative part of this is, well, are there going to be a lot of Microsoft exclusives now? So for example, is Starfield, the highly anticipated game from Bethesda Game Studios, going to only be on Xbox/PC? And that's also an important note. Basically all Microsoft exclusives now are on both Xbox and PC, not only consoles. So when I say exclusive going forward, that's what I mean for Microsoft. But we actually heard a response from Phil Spencer of Xbox, as he describes how they plan, one, to actually honor the exclusivity agreement of Deathloop and Ghostwire Tokyo, so there still will be year or so long exclusives on PS5. So we are getting Microsoft-owned PS5 exclusives, which is kind of hilarious. But even further, future Bethesda games will be on Xbox, PC, and other consoles on a case-by-case basis. So the simple answer to, does this mean Bethesda titles will be Microsoft exclusives? Sometimes. Really what I think this means is some of these smaller titles going forward likely will end up being Microsoft exclusives, but certain other ones may not be. Giant IPs with the likes of Starfield that will in fact generate a massive amount of revenue on a PlayStation 5 platform may actually release everywhere. But at the same time, that could be a wrong interpretation of this, because you also have to consider that Microsoft just paid $7.5 billion. They likely want Bethesda games to sell Xboxes, or at least to get people to subscribe to Game Pass. And having quite a bit of exclusives, or perhaps even some timed exclusivity, is almost certainly going to happen. One hypothetical I put out is actually Starfield. Starfield is expected to be releasing in holiday of 2021. Having Starfield as a Xbox exclusive right before the holiday season, when a ton of people are likely looking to pick up a new console, would be a huge system seller. I think a lot of people would definitely buy an Xbox for that game if they're deciding between a PS5 or an Xbox. And it always feels like it's that second holiday wave where a lot of people really start to get into the next gen and you get some good new releases. But then again, we also had those earlier statements from Todd Howard about being able to play anywhere with any controller. So perhaps that was something Todd Howard was really after, not having exclusives to one console or another. And if anything, I could see that being the reality of this. Some of the smaller games remaining exclusives one place or another, but the giant ones from BGS, not so much. But even still, taking this all together, we don't really know. Although this statement does provide a bit of additional context, there's still a lot we don't really know. People have taken to pointing to The Outer Worlds or Wasteland 3 as recent purchases by Microsoft that do remain as non-exclusives. They're on PlayStation also. But both of those games were in development prior to the purchase and aren't published by Xbox. Conversely, Grounded from Obsidian is an Xbox exclusive and published by Microsoft. Avowed is published by Microsoft and is looking like it's going to be an Xbox exclusive. So another point to keep in mind with this is it might be the first gen of games, things that are currently in development that may already have deals going on behind the scenes that we don't know about will continue to be on all platforms, but over time I would imagine Zenimax becomes more and more exclusive to Xboxes and Microsoft overall. Because again, they did just pay $7.5 billion, they probably want to sell some consoles as a result of that. Also, this news going live the day before you could pre-order a new Xbox is definitely no accident. And you have to imagine little things like early access or betas will almost always be Microsoft exclusives going forward. But then we have the very interesting topic of New Vegas 2, or really the future of Fallout overall, as now Microsoft does own the rights to Fallout, but also Bethesda, Obsidian, and Inzile, which the founder of that studio founded the studio that created Fallout Fallout originally. So now with Bethesda, Fallout, and Obsidian under the same umbrella, could we see a Fallout New Vegas 2 or even just a Fallout game from Obsidian in general? And Obsidian has already posted some cheeky tweets around this. Just a simple shrug, but overall seem eager at the news. We know Josh Sawyer is working on a mystery project at Obsidian right now, and it's not Avowed, the other big game from that company. Josh Sawyer was the project director and lead designer of Fallout New Vegas. He's been working on this for some time. We've known about it for a while, as he confirmed it in a tweet about a month ago, and even just today had another cheeky tweet tweeting out video games. So really, I would say there's two ways to look at this. Perhaps Obsidian is in fact working on Fallout New Vegas 2 already, and that's why we're getting these cheeky tweets, but alternatively, perhaps they just want to, and that's why we're getting tweets like this. They're appealing to the masses because they want their bosses with Microsoft, who now own Fallout, to actually give them the opportunity to make the next Fallout. But honestly, it could go either way here. I think it is very plausible for Obsidian to actually make a new Fallout game, mainly because we do have this Fallout 5 problem that I've talked about. That in, Bethesda Game Studios is working next on Starfield, then the Elder Scrolls 6, then maybe we'll get a Fallout release, but the problem with that is it's so far away. Starfield may come out in 2021, then maybe the Elder Scrolls 6 in 2024, even 2025, then another 2 to 3 years to make a new Fallout game, so 2027, 8. But if they do go in that order, you're leaving Starfield on the back burner for a long time. 7-8 years of no content around your big new franchise would be odd. With that in mind, Obsidian has Avowed coming up as their next big game. It'll likely come out within the next 2 years at some point, but then after that, not much. A lot of people are suspecting the Outer Worlds too, but perhaps Obsidian going from Avowed and then development on a new Fallout game could make a lot of sense. You have to imagine Microsoft doesn't want to leave Fallout dormant. Based off the most recent numbers, Fallout 4 was Bethesda's best-selling game of all time, and until the Elder Scrolls 6 releases, it's probably their most valuable IP, with Fallout 4 and Fallout 76 doing much of the heavy lifting there. Microsoft just spent a ton of money on this company. They probably want to use this IP, not sit on it for the next 8 years or so before we see the next iteration. Although to keep things grounded, Josh Sawyer tweeted about working on a new game about a month and a half ago. Is it plausible that he was already working on New Vegas 2 a month and a half before the news of the Microsoft acquisition even went public? It could just be early pre-production on a hypothetical game, but that would be pretty ahead of the curve, so I don't know how much stock you can put in it. Although I for one am definitely hopeful, and something else, I think we should put some stock in the possibility of a remaster coming now. Todd Howard has said in the past that he doesn't really like remasters. Now that Microsoft owns the IP to the Elder Scrolls and Fallout, it feels like they'd be leaving a lot of value on the table by not at least taking a look at those. Remastering Morrowind, Oblivion, Fallout 3, or New Vegas seems decently likely. Microsoft has a ton of studios now, a ridiculous number at 23. With an arsenal that big, there's definitely 1 or 2 studios in there that could say, hey, try and remaster one of these games. You basically know it's going to sell well with how much of a cult following they still have via modding, and Microsoft has already likened remastering games like Command & Conquer and the Age of Empire series as of late. A remaster of one of these games could be a great addition and a great system seller for the next gen, especially if they do take advantage of some of those engine upgrades we could see from Fallout 76 or whatever Bethesda is working on for Starfield. One of the other big questions around this is what happens with some of their live service games, the games that are actively being updated. Notably, that's in regards to ESO and Fallout 76. It seems pretty likely that just based off some of the past statements, there could be more money being thrown around or perhaps even some upgrades for those games. ESO seems to be doing pretty well as of right now, but Fallout 76 in particular could use a bit of help. Additional studio support, more manpower, or just more money to actually get certain fixes or upgrades or even just new features on the table. Something interesting that did just happen with Fallout 76 is it seemed like the marketing budget was quite a bit larger for patch 22 that just released this past week. We saw a trailer, a lot more activity online around this, that being official content posted by Bethesda. So some have been speculating that we're already starting to see an additional investment into this title, and I certainly am excited for the future of these games. Nothing could happen, but also quite a bit could happen with this additional Microsoft support. Fallout 76 in particular has had issues with a lot of red tape behind the scenes, and a change in management, or really overall a change in ownership, could certainly be an exciting prospect for this game. At the same time, I don't necessarily see it as a huge system seller. You have to imagine it will be coming to the next gen of consoles, so perhaps we'll see some kind of special updates around that, but at least for right now, we haven't heard much around what exactly that'll entail, if it'll even happen at all. Although at the same time, it seems almost certain the developers at Bethesda Studios didn't know about this. 2,300 employees and nobody leaked it. You have to imagine it was kept to top tier management and probably not something widely distributed distributed throughout the company prior to today, or even probably after the announcement went public. Another aspect that people have been curious about is the death of mods. This predominantly because back in the day, Microsoft did purchase Havok, and previously Havok had public tools modders were using, but then after the Microsoft acquisition, those were closed. But I really doubt this. Microsoft has been pretty well supporting of mods with their games. We of course have mod support for Fallout 4 and Skyrim on Xbox, but even other Xbox titles do come with official mod support. Microsoft has mod support built into their PC Xbox app, so it is something they obviously consider with games added to their marketplace. And also, mod support is such a massive selling point for Bethesda Game Studios titles, you have to imagine Microsoft knows that and isn't going to shy away from it, especially considering they've never really shied away from mod support in the past. So for those concerned that mods are going away or will be massively affected by this, I don't really think so. Many Microsoft purchased studios still retain a lot of autonomy, and I think cutting out some fan favorite features like mod support is very against what they've done in the past. Then there's also some questions around what happens with Providence Equity, or some of the more negative side of Zenimax / Bethesda games as of late. We've seen this move towards games as a service by Bethesda, Fallout 76 and microtransactions, Creation Club and those microtransactions, and a lot of this was attributed to the Zenimax board of directors. So now that Microsoft owns Zenimax, will this change anything? And it seems possible. As of right now, Zenimax is still listed as being in the portfolio of Providence Equity, one of the big stakeholders who is kind of credited with being one of the main proponents of some of these less consumer-friendly decisions, and they just updated it by actually posting the recent press release around this acquisition by Microsoft, so they definitely still could be involved. And it's again one of those interesting things because many of the past Microsoft acquisitions have left the studios with a lot of autonomy, but with Bethesda, and considering Bethesda's recent questionable decisions, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Perhaps it was more of a financial concern, so we'll see a shift away from less desirable decisions, but either way, I would overall expect at least some changes in the future. And my thoughts on this broadly, I actually think it's pretty good. I'm excited for the future of Bethesda under this new ownership. Microsoft does have the potential to bring a lot to the table, improving things like Fallout 76 and its support, actually giving the Fallout IP an avenue to be created in the near future, not just 10 years down the line from Bethesda. But it's also one of those things that we're going to have to somewhat wait and see. Are we going to get console exclusivity from Microsoft? Will current or existing titles start to see more vast improvements, or is it really going to be more of a focused on next-gen stuff and things Bethesda currently has in the pipeline but aren't yet announced or released? We don't really know, but it's definitely something to look forward to in the future. Overall, hopefully this video was informative, hopefully you enjoyed this one, and I'll definitely keep you guys up to date if we find out anything more about this new deal or relationship. As always, again, I thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you all next time. Later.